Let me ask you something before we begin. Have you ever walked into a nice room, a professional room, a room where you had every right to be and felt someone decide, before you even opened your mouth, that you didn't belong there? Not because of anything you said, not because of anything you did, just because of the way you looked? Maybe you brushed it off. Maybe you told yourself you were imagining it. Maybe you smiled. Because what else can you do when the person making that judgment has power over the next 5 minutes of your life? This is a story about one woman who didn't brush it off, who didn't imagine it, who smiled and then, when the time was exactly right, opened a leather portfolio and changed everything. Her name was Amara Okafor, and on a hot Wednesday afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia, she walked into a bank to make a simple withdrawal. What happened next will stay with you for a long time. Picture Peachtree Street in Midtown Atlanta on a Wednesday at noon. The Georgia sun is doing what it does in summer, pressing down on everything, making even the shadows feel warm. People are moving in and out of offices, grabbing lunch, living their ordinary Wednesday lives. Crown Imperial Bank sits on that street, like it has always been there and always will be. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, the kind of quiet hum that says money lives here and has for a very long time. Tellers behind their stations. Loan officers in glass-walled offices. A lobby that whispers, without a single word, that it was built for serious people conducting serious business. And through the front doors, walks Amara Okafor. She is dressed in a charcoal designer suit. Her leather portfolio is tucked under one arm. She moves the way people move when they have spent decades walking into important rooms, not quickly, not slowly, but with the kind of unhurried certainty that says, I know exactly where I'm going. And I know exactly why I'm here. She has banked at this branch for 6 years. 6 years of deposits and wire transfers and quarterly reviews and the kind of financial activity that most people will never see in a lifetime. She knows this lobby. She knows the teller stations. She has walked this exact path from the front door to the counter more times than she can count. Today, she needs to make a withdrawal. $25,000. In the world Amara Okafor operates in, this is not a dramatic sum. It is a Wednesday errand. It should take 5 minutes. She takes her place at the counter. She places her withdrawal slip on the marble surface. She looks up. And Colin Hartley looks back. Now, I want you to understand something about Colin Hartley. He was not a villain in the movie poster sense. He was not twirling a mustache. He was a teller. A 12-year employee. A man who had sat behind that counter long enough that his assumptions had become invisible to him, so familiar, so automatic, that they didn't feel like assumptions anymore. They felt like instincts. They felt like doing his job. He looked at Amara Okafor, her suit, her portfolio, her calm, her face, and in the space of a single second, he decided what kind of person she was. He was wrong. In every possible way, he was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. Excuse me, he said, and here is the thing about how he said it. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't lean in. He spoke at a volume that was designed to be heard. By the customer next to Amara. By the people in the queue behind her. By the loan officer glancing up from her desk across the lobby. By everyone. The welfare office is 3 blocks down on Forsyth. The lobby went still. Not silent still. There is a difference. Silence is when there's no sound. Stillness is when everyone around you holds their breath at the same time, because they have just witnessed something and they are not yet sure what to do about it. Amara's expression did not change, and that composure is the first extraordinary thing about this story. Because most of us, if we're honest, would have felt something crack open inside us at those words. Shame, anger. The desperate, humiliating urge to prove ourselves to a man who had already decided he wasn't going to listen. Amara placed her withdrawal slip on the counter. I'd like to withdraw $25,000 from my account, please. Colin's laugh was short, sharp. The kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh at all, it's a dismissal dressed up as amusement. $25,000. He repeated it like a punchline. Lady, that's more money than most people see in a year. He snatched the slip from the counter without glancing at it. Let me guess, you're going to tell me you're some kind of business executive? They all say that. He gestured toward the ATM vestibule near the entrance. Machines outside if you have an EBT card. I want you to sit with that for a moment. She had walked in with a valid bank card, a withdrawal slip, 6 years of account history, a platinum card with her name, embossed on it in clean, Unmistakable letters. And a man who had never met her, never spoken to her, never spent a single second learning who she was decided, in front of a lobby full of people, to treat her like a fraud. Because of how she looked, that is the only reason, the only one. Patricia Holloway appeared from her glass office. She was the branch supervisor, and she carried herself the way supervisors do when they have already decided whose side they're on before they've heard the first word of the story. She walked up, assessed the situation in 3 seconds, and stood beside Colin. "What's the issue, Colin?" "Suspicious withdrawal request," he said importantly. 25,000. Claims she has an account with us. Patricia's eyebrows went up. "Ma'am, for large transactions we require employment verification and documentation confirming the source of funds. It's standard procedure." Amara reached into her bag. She produced her Georgia driver's license. And then she placed her Platinum Crown Imperial Bank card on the counter, her name embossed right there on the surface, catching the chandelier light the way platinum does, with a kind of quiet, undeniable authority. Colin barely looked at it. "Anyone can order fake IDs," he said. "The counterfeits these days are practically professional." He held her card up between 2 fingers like it was evidence at a crime scene. "They even get the logos right." "I have banked here for 6 years, Amara said. Her voice was still level, still calm. "My account number is on both the card and the identification." Patricia stepped closer to Colin, and the two of them formed something not a wall exactly, but the social equivalent of one, a united front. An institution deciding, in real time, how it felt about the woman standing in front of it. "We have protocols," Patricia said carefully, "for certain account types. These measures protect both the bank and our legitimate customers." Certain account types. I want you to notice that phrase. They didn't say large withdrawals. They didn't say first-time transactions or unusual activity. They said certain account types. And everyone in that lobby, everyone understood what that phrase was really saying, even if nobody said it aloud. Then Marcus Ellis was called over. Marcus was the security officer 10 years at Crown Imperial. A broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and the expression of someone being asked to do something that doesn't sit right with him. When he came out from the back offices and saw Amara standing there calm, documented, blameless, something moved across his face. Not defiance, not courage, not yet. But recognition. He knew what he was looking at. "Marcus," Patricia announced, loud enough for the whole lobby to hear, "we may need assistance. Potential fraud situation." And Marcus, because his mortgage depended on following orders, walked over. Amara's phone buzzed silently against her side. A calendar reminder. Federal Reserve Advisory Call, 2 p.m., a call she was supposed to lead. She didn't look at it. 3 rows back in the queue stood Zoe Adeyemi. Zoe was a freelance journalist. She had come into the bank that afternoon to deposit a check, the kind of perfectly ordinary errand that perfectly ordinary Wednesdays are made of. She had not come to make history. She had not come looking for a story. But she recognized what she was watching. Because people who have lived a certain kind of life recognize it immediately when they see it happening to someone else. She lowered her hand just enough to angle her phone. Her thumb found the Instagram Live button, and she typed a caption that was brief and precise. "Banking discrimination happening right now, Peachtree Street, Atlanta." The viewer count started climbing. 200, 500, 800. I think about Zoe a lot when I think about this story. Because she didn't do anything dramatic. She didn't step forward and make a speech. She didn't argue with Patricia or confront Colin. She just pointed her phone at the truth and let other people see it. And that small, quiet act was about to change everything. 1,200 viewers. 2,000. The comments were flooding in from people who recognized the scene because they had lived versions of it themselves. People who had been followed around stores, questioned at airports, asked, in nice rooms with marble floors, whether they were really supposed to be there. "This is disgusting," someone wrote. "Where is this?" another asked. Someone tagged the news. The story was leaving the building, and back at the counter, none of the people who had created it had any idea. Richard Pemberton came through the executive elevator with the energy of a man who had been briefed in transit and was still processing. He was the regional manager, 20 years in banking, a man accustomed to walking into difficult rooms and restoring order through the sheer weight of his title. He assessed the lobby, the way generals assess a battlefield quickly, from the outside in. Black woman at the counter. Growing crowd, multiple phones recording. He positioned himself between Amara and the counter, as though the counter were something that needed protecting. "I'm Richard Pemberton, regional manager," he announced formally. "I understand there's been some confusion around our verification procedures." "There is no confusion, Mr. Pemberton," Amara said. "I am attempting to withdraw funds from my own account." Richard pulled out a thick folder of forms. Employment verification, source of funds documentation. A detailed written statement explaining the purpose of the withdrawal. He spoke in the measured tones of institutional authority, the particular confidence of a man who has spent 20 years never having to consider that he might be the problem. "What company do you work for?" he asked. "I'm self-employed." Colin snorted. It was the snort of a man who considers self-employment a polite word for unemployed. Across the lobby, a young black professional who'd been watching from near the loan desks stepped forward. His voice was steady with the kind of anger that comes not from losing control, but from recognizing a pattern you have seen too many times. "This is completely absurd. She has a valid ID and a bank card. What more do you need?" "Sir, please don't interfere with security procedures," Patricia said sharply. But the lobby was dividing. You could feel it. Some customers stood behind the bank's performance of vigilance, nodding, reassured that the institution was being careful. Others watched with the heavy discomfort of people witnessing something they know is wrong, but haven't yet found the words for. Zoe's stream hit 5,000 viewers. Then 8,000. CNN had begun embedding her feed on their breaking news page. And still, Amara stood at that counter, calm as still water, waiting. Then Richard said the words that were designed to end it. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait in the side area while we complete verification. This could take several hours." Several hours. He gestured toward a small waiting area near the security desk, a few chairs, a side table with outdated magazines. A space designed, in that moment, not for comfort but for humiliation. "Sit there," the gesture said. "Wait there, like a suspect, while the real customers conduct their real business around you." This was the ultimatum. Submit to this to being treated like a criminal in a place you have every right to be, or leave without your money and your dignity intact. Amara's phone was buzzing again. A text from her assistant, board members asking about the Federal Reserve call. A message from her attorney, who had been watching Zoe's live stream. "Want me to come down?" She silenced every notification without reading a single one. She did not move toward the waiting area. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue, or plead, or perform innocence for the people watching. She simply stood there, and that stillness, that absolute, unshakable stillness began to feel, to everyone watching, like something more than patience. It began to feel like a person who knows exactly how this story ends. Zoe's viewer count crossed 15,000. The overhead intercom crackled to life. "Executive committee meeting 10 minutes. All managers report to the boardroom immediately." Something shifted in the room, the kind of shift you feel in your chest before you can explain it. Amara reached into her leather portfolio. Slowly, deliberately, the way people move when they are in absolutely no hurry, because they already know what happens next. She withdrew a single business card. She placed it on the counter in front of Colin Hartley. He picked it up, and in the voice of a man who has not yet understood that the ground has shifted beneath his feet, he read it aloud. "Amara Okafor, President and Chief Executive Officer, Okafor Capital Group." He set it down with a smirk. "Nice card. They're making these in China for about $5 now." But Richard Pemberton had gone very quiet. The name was doing something to his memory. Something slow, and certain, and unstoppable. Okafor Capital Group. He had seen it in board briefings, in acquisition filings, in the executive communications that came down from corporate. He couldn't quite place it yet, but it was coming. Amara's hand moved back into the portfolio. She placed it on the counter without a word. A second card, smaller than the first, but heavier in the way that some things are heavy not because of their physical weight, but because of what they mean. This card bore the Crown Imperial Bank logo. And beneath it, in small, precise text that Richard Pemberton had to lean forward to read. Board of Directors. Preferred shareholder, series of voting rights. The color left Richard Pemberton's face. Not gradually, not in stages, all at once, the way color leaves a photograph left too long in the sun. He read the card again, then again, as though reading it a third time might change what it said. It didn't. "You're on the board," he whispered. It barely made it out of his mouth. I don't merely sit on the board, Mr. Pemberton. Amara's voice had changed. Not in volume, she still wasn't raising it. Not in tone, she was still composed, still measured, still the calmest person in the room. But something in it had shifted. A weight had appeared, the weight of everything she actually was, finally allowed into the open. Okafor Capital Group holds a 31% controlling interest in Crown Imperial Corporation. We are your largest single shareholder. The lobby held its breath. And then, in the space of a few seconds, it exhaled into something that looked like chaos. Colin Hartley's mouth fell open. The first business card, the one he had mocked, the one he had compared to a $5 Chinese counterfeit, slipped from his fingers and landed on the marble counter with a small, flat sound that somehow everyone heard. Patricia Holloway took a slow step backward. Not a dramatic step, not a theatrical one. Just the instinctive physical retreat of a person whose body has understood something their mind is still catching up to. Richard Pemberton stared at the card in his hand, reading it, rereading it, his 20 years of corporate composure working as hard as it had ever worked in his life. And Zoe Adeyemi's phone still streaming, still recording every second of this, watched its viewer count do something extraordinary. 15,000 viewers became 31,000 in under 60 seconds. The hashtag bank owner reveal was trending across Atlanta before the minute was out. Nationally, within the hour, people were sharing clips, tagging news stations, calling their friends into the room to watch their screens. Because what was happening on that live stream was the kind of thing that happens maybe once in a generation, the moment when the most powerful person in the building is also the person who has just spent 40 minutes being treated like she had no right to be there at all. But Amara wasn't finished. She opened her portfolio, that leather portfolio she had carried in from the Georgia Sun, the one that had sat quietly on the counter while Colin mocked her and Richard buried her in forms, and she began to lay documents on the marble surface. A folder marked, Confidential Board Review. Okafor Capital acquired our controlling interest 8 months ago, she said. I have been conducting anonymous visits to Crown Imperial branches across the region. Visiting as an ordinary customer. Making ordinary requests. Observing how your staff responds to people who look like me. She looked at Colin directly. He did not look away, he couldn't. Somehow, he was frozen. Today's interaction was specifically designed to assess your frontline service protocols. You have provided exceptional data. Let that sink in for a moment. She had known. Not that it would be Colin specifically, not that it would be this branch on this Wednesday, but she had known because the data told her. Because 47 discrimination complaints in 6 months told her that if she walked into enough Crown Imperial branches as an ordinary black woman making an ordinary request, eventually someone would treat her the way Colin had treated her today. She had not come to Crown Imperial Bank that afternoon to make a withdrawal. She had come to collect evidence. And the executive committee meeting that everyone was scrambling to get to, the one the intercom had been announcing all afternoon, that was her meeting. She was the reason for it. She was the one who had called it. She had sat in that lobby for 40 minutes, being humiliated by people who were about to sit across a boardroom table from her, and she had let it happen calmly, deliberately, with her phone recording every notification, her attorney watching the live stream, and federal regulators already copied on a preliminary complaint filed 37 minutes into the incident. She had not come unprepared, she had come ready. And the difference between those two things is everything. It was Colin who broke first. Which makes sense, when you think about it. Patricia had her supervisor title to hide behind. Richard had his corporate training. But Colin was just a man standing behind a counter, and the full weight of what he had done was landing on him now with nothing to soften the blow. Miss Okafor. His voice cracked on the second syllable. I have 2 kids. I have a mortgage. I was doing my job. I was following the bank's procedures. I didn't know who you were. This was a terrible mistake. There it is. That phrase. I didn't know who you were. And I want to stop here for a second, because that phrase matters. It matters because of what it reveals. Colin wasn't apologizing for how he had treated Amara. He was apologizing for treating her that way once he found out she was powerful, and those are 2 completely different things. If Amara had walked in that day and been exactly who Colin assumed, she was a woman with no money, no account, no claim to that marble lobby, would any of this have been wrong? In Colin's mind, apparently not. The behavior was only a mistake because of who she turned out to be. Amara heard all of that in 5 words, and she answered it perfectly. Show me the bank procedure that authorizes racial profiling. Produce the training manual that instructs your employees to assume black customers are engaged in fraud. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Because no such document existed. It couldn't exist. Federal law explicitly prohibited exactly what Colin had been doing for 12 years. What existed instead was something quieter and more dangerous than a written policy. It was a culture. An assumption passed like water through the pipes of an institution, never named, never challenged, never corrected until today. Patricia attempted one last maneuver. Perhaps we can resolve this through internal channels. This matter became external 40 minutes ago, Amara replied, when you summoned a security officer to intimidate a bank shareholder in front of a live audience of 15,000 people. The documentation exists. The regulatory notifications have been filed. The path forward is accountability, not containment. The customers who had nodded along with Colin's vigilance were no longer nodding. Some were looking at their shoes. One man near the loan desks was quietly, frantically, deleting something from his phone. And then Marcus Ellis stepped forward. Quietly, without being asked, he walked up to where Amara was standing, and he said, "Miss Okafor, I want to apologize for my role in this. I knew it was wrong. I should have done more." This was the moment in the story that gets me every time. Because Amara could have been cold. She could have been clinical. She was holding more power in that room than everyone else combined, and she would have been within every right to let the full force of it fall on Marcus along with everyone else. Instead, she said this, "Officer Ellis, you were placed in an impossible position by the people above you. Your discomfort today was not weakness, it was professional integrity, and it will be reflected in our report." Marcus Ellis looked like a man who had been holding his breath for 40 minutes and had finally been allowed to exhale. Grace under pressure is its own kind of power, and Amara had it in abundance. The bank's president came through the executive elevator at a pace that suggested someone had found a way to run in a suit without appearing to run. Edward Whitmore. 30 years in banking. A man whose face was built for composure and whose composure was, at this particular moment, working harder than it ever had. He bypassed every subordinate in the lobby. Colin, Patricia, Richard, as though they had ceased to exist. He walked directly to Amara. "Miss Okafor," he said quietly, "I want to address this personally. I want to assure you that what happened today does not represent the values of this institution." "Mr. Whitmore," she replied, "this incident is not an isolated event, it is a pattern. And I have the data to prove it." She lifted the board review folder and placed it in front of him. 47 discrimination complaints filed against Crown Imperial branches in the past 6 months alone. 78% of them involving customers of color. Management at multiple branches had seen the complaints, had filed them, had done nothing. Whitmore's hands were not quite steady as he held the report. Amara showed him her phone. Crown Imperial Corporation stock had fallen 4.2% in after-hours trading, $340 million in lost market capitalization. In one afternoon, because of one live stream, because of one teller who had spent 12 years being wrong about people and had never once been corrected. And then Amara laid out her terms. Not demands, terms. Because demands are what you make when you're fighting from below. Terms are what you set when you are in charge of the table. First, immediate termination of every employee involved in the incident, with a full investigation of their prior complaint histories. Second, mandatory bias recognition training, 40 hours of certification for every customer-facing employee across all Crown Imperial branches within 60 days. Third, a real-time AI monitoring system designed to identify and flag discriminatory patterns in customer interactions before they escalate. Fourth, an independent civil rights ombudsman, reporting directly to the board, with the authority to terminate employees and rewrite policies. Fifth, a $25 million community investment fund providing low-interest loans to minority-owned businesses and financial literacy programs across underserved Atlanta communities. Okafor Capital's board meets tomorrow morning, she said. Acceptance means continued partnership and our full investment position maintained. Rejection triggers immediate divestiture of our $1.2 billion stake and a public statement explaining exactly why. She began packing her portfolio. Slowly, methodically, the way a person packs when they have already won. And I want you to hear what she said next, because this is the part of the story that tells you the most about who Amara Okafor actually was. This was never just about today. It was never just about me. It was about every person who walked into one of your branches before me who had no portfolio to open, no board seat to reveal, no leverage to apply, and was treated exactly the same way, and went home with nothing but the memory of it. Zoe's stream had reached 52,000 viewers. The story was on WSB TV Atlanta, MSNBC, and news outlets from London to Lagos. Edward Whitmore looked at the folder in his hands, at the stock figures on the screen, at the lobby full of customers and cameras, and the accumulated weight of 47 complaints that his institution had quietly buried. And he said, "We accept." The emergency board meeting convened the following morning. Directors had flown in overnight from Houston, Chicago, and Charlotte. The mahogany boardroom table held the weight of what had happened and the uncertainty of what was still coming. Colin Hartley was terminated, effective immediately. An internal investigation conducted with the remarkable speed that only genuine crisis produces had uncovered 34 documented complaints spanning 7 years. 34 times, customers had reported exactly what Amara had experienced. 34 times, the institution had filed the report and done nothing. Colin had not been acting alone. He had been acting in a system that allowed him to. Patricia Holloway was dismissed for supervisory negligence. The investigation found a clear pattern. She had been aware of complaints against Colin and had consistently chosen to side with her employee over the customers he had mistreated. Richard Pemberton submitted his resignation before dawn. He didn't wait to be asked. And Marcus Ellis, the security officer who had been placed in an impossible position, who had hated every second of what he had been asked to do, whose discomfort had been visible to everyone paying attention, Marcus Ellis was promoted. Director of Customer Advocacy and Compliance. From security guard to executive management. His integrity during the crisis recognized, rewarded, and made permanent. The board vote was unanimous. Zoe Adeyemi was brought on as the bank's external transparency consultant. Her background, as a citizen journalist, the thing that had made her reach for her phone in a queue on a Wednesday afternoon, was now an institutional asset. She would help Crown Imperial build the kind of accountability that doesn't depend on someone being brave enough to press record. The reforms were implemented with a first-year budget of $67 million. The AI monitoring system went into beta testing within the week. The civil rights ombudsman position was filled by a former Department of Justice attorney with a reputation for not being impressed by corporate titles. The Community Investment Fund began accepting applications from minority-owned businesses across Atlanta within 30 days. Real change, not a press release, not a sensitivity seminar and a company-wide email. Real, structural, expensive, difficult change. Crown Imperial stock recovered completely within 2 weeks. Then it surpassed its previous high, as ESG-focused institutional investors increased their positions, reading the speed and seriousness of the reform as proof that accountability was genuine rather than cosmetic. The institution had been humiliated, and it had responded by becoming better. That doesn't always happen. When it does, it is worth noting. Part 6, 1 year later. A year is a long time in a story. Long enough for the headlines to fade, for the hashtags to quiet, for the moment to become history rather than news. So let's see what a year did. Discrimination complaints across Crown Imperial branches fell by 52%, not because people stopped experiencing discrimination, but because the culture that had made it invisible and consequence-free had been dismantled, piece by piece, from the inside. Minority business lending increased by 34% across the institution's entire portfolio. The Community Investment Fund had approved over 200 loans to minority-owned businesses in the Atlanta metro area alone, creating jobs, building credit histories, opening doors that had been quietly shut for years. Zoe Adeyemi's documentary, Owning the Room, The Atlanta Story, premiered at the Atlanta Film Festival. It was acquired by a major streaming platform before the closing credits finished rolling. The film followed Amara's story from the lobby to the boardroom, and included interviews with the customers who had witnessed the incident, the banking regulators who had watched the reform unfold in real time, and the minority business owners whose lives had been changed by the community fund. Marcus Ellis became one of the most requested speakers on the banking conference circuit. He traveled to cities across the country, telling his story, the story of a man caught between his conscience and his paycheck, who had chosen the paycheck, and who had been shown grace anyway, and who had spent the year since trying to be worthy of it. I think about that afternoon every day. He said in one interview, not with shame anymore, with purpose, because I know now what it costs when good people stay silent. And I know what it looks like when one person refuses to. And Amara Okafor. 1 year after that Wednesday in Atlanta, she stood at a podium at the Global Banking Equality Summit, speaking to delegates from 47 countries. She was not the most famous person in the room. She was not the loudest. She spoke without notes, in the same unhurried voice she had used at the teller counter when Colin Hartley told her the welfare office was 3 blocks down. Dignity is not negotiable, she told them. And when we made the cost of discrimination visible financially, legally, publicly, institutions moved faster than decades of litigation had ever managed to move them. Not because they suddenly developed a conscience, because the math changed, because discrimination became expensive, and when something becomes expensive enough, systems find a way to fix it. She paused. But the math only changes when someone documents the truth. When someone stays in that lobby instead of walking out. When someone points a phone at what is actually happening and refuses to look away. She looked out at the room. So stay. Document. Refuse to look away. Because every story like this that gets told out loud makes the next one less likely to happen. I want to end this story, not with the boardroom, not with the stock price, not even with the summit. I want to end it somewhere quieter. Picture a Crown Imperial Bank branch. Somewhere in Atlanta Buckhead, maybe, or out toward Decatur, or down in College Park. A Tuesday afternoon, maybe 6 months after everything we just talked about. A woman walks in. She is wearing whatever she wore to work that day. She carries whatever bag she carries. She walks up to the teller counter and says she would like to make a withdrawal. And the teller looks up. And for just a fraction of a second, the old instinct flickers. The assumption tries to form. The judgment reaches for its familiar shape. And then something stops it. Maybe it's the training. Maybe it's the monitoring system. Maybe it's the new ombudsman whose office is 2 floors up. Maybe it's just the memory of a story. Everyone in that building knows a story about what happens when you look at a person and decide, before they've spoken a word, that you already know who they are. Whatever it is, it works. The teller smiles. A real smile. And says, "Of course. How can I help you today?" And the woman makes her withdrawal and walks back out into the Atlanta sun, and she never knows how close it came to being different. She never knows what happened in this lobby a few months ago, or what it cost, or what it took to build the world she just walked through. She just knows that she was treated with dignity. And she goes about her day. That woman, that unnamed, unknown woman who will never appear in any documentary or board review or viral hashtag, she is Amara Okafor's real legacy. Not the billions. Not the boardroom. Not the summit stage. The woman who walked out of a bank on a Tuesday afternoon and never even had to think about it. That is what justice looks like when it's working. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just ordinary. Just decent. Just a person being treated the way every person deserves to be treated. Every single time. Without exception. Without hesitation. Without a platinum card having to prove it first. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the room isn't money. It's a person who knows their worth. And refuses quietly, completely, without raising their voice even once, to let anyone in that room forget it. If this story moved you, share it. Not just because it's a good story, though it is, but because every time a story like this gets told out loud, someone somewhere recognizes themselves in it. Someone feels less alone. Someone learns that calm, prepared, documented dignity is one of the most powerful forces on earth. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the second card, Marcus stepping forward? The unnamed woman at the end? And if you haven't already, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly this. Real stories, real power, real people who refuse to let the world tell them who they were. We'll see you in the next one.